My name is Brendan Munn, and presenting today, talking about mass gathering research and taking it to the next level through a global event data research registry. My conflicts of interest to declare that I'm a paid medical director, provide clinical services at events. The aim of this presentation is to characterize the considerations, challenges, and potential solutions to the implementation of a global event data registry. And underneath those aims is the collaborative piece of the people in this room, and that all of you are stakeholders in this, all of you are potential contributors to this in terms of understanding, planning, and also utilization. So how many people in the room have access to a data collection database from multiple events? Hands up. More than one. Okay, so about 6 or 10, say maybe 12 max. Okay, that's great. I'm glad to hear you have that. You will know some of the challenges involved in doing this registry work. The common theme when you read about implementation of registries in at least the health space, but in most spaces in general, is that it's a little bit like event medicine. It's 90% planning, and in order to make sure that it goes off really well. And so I'm going to structure this talk in terms of goals and objectives, the data collection at events itself, the data registry structure, and getting data drawn into that registry. So first, goals and objectives. So, stakeholder consultation, there are an enormous number of stakeholders at the local, national, and global level when it comes to mass gatherings. And they align in all sorts of categories, but all of them have a shared interest in understanding the processes of how mass gatherings work and the potential impacts of these events. The research agenda of the registry in general is to try to elevate the quality on the level of evidence pyramid from where we stand these days, which is a vast majority of case series, case reports, editorials, expert opinion, and move that into the higher space where we can potentially do higher level evidence, as well as, I don't know, we'll get to randomized controlled trials, but that's a possibility. The data registry will take us along that way to having better proof and better evidence for the processes that we're doing. Along the way, we have this byproduct, which is also very valuable, of collaborating and networking as a group, of standardizing things so that we're comparing apples to apples when we talk about things, and about evaluating best practices in an iterative fashion so that the results that we get from this data registry inform what minimizes negative outcomes or increases positive outcomes, and can inform our planning for future events. So the second area of data collection, and so this is hurdle number 1 of 2 that's really, I think, gotten in the way of getting the registry up and running for years on a global level anyways, and that's there's no standard definitions, there's no standardized data sets. And we're starting to get to the point where that's starting to emerge, and so we're able to start really having the right conversations about what we need to put into this and what it means so that we can compare apples to apples. The second part of data collection is the event operations and actually collecting data on event. And I'm going to point to these 2 papers in PDM. One is on improving data quality and the reasons why data might not be the best quality when it's collected on event, which is a very comprehensive, excellent paper. And the second is work done about electronic implementation of the data that's collected at events in order to facilitate its use in a registry database. And both of these, I think, have really good overviews of why we want to do this and how to do it well and how to avoid the pitfalls. The other issue of data collection is how do we make it a carrot for people to use, to put that data that they've collected well, according to the things that we've just described, into a registry. And so we could just lean on legacy and research interest for all the research nerds, but the truth is most people don't want to spend the effort unless there's a reason for them to do it. And so the first thing is we want to add some value to things. The first thing we want to do is make the negatives less negative. So we want to make it a simple platform, and we want to make it succinct data set that's easy to put in and clear. And we want to look at extra things that we can add that are positive. So can we give people some toolkits, some templates around data collection, around event management in general and processes, sort of best practices? Can we help them generate reports if they have data templates that they're using with raw data that we can generate things for? And can they have comparisons for when they put things into the registry to see where they fall on the bell curve of like events, to see whether they can improve something? We also want to advertise it. So that's through our stakeholders, as I described, and through you, hopefully, through social media. And there's also the possibility to be looking at policy and permitting. So is there a way to say that after action reports for events from a public health perspective or a governance perspective, are tied to inclusion of their post-action reporting to this registry in order to contribute to the research body of knowledge. The third section, data registry. So the second big hurdle has been ethics, privacy, and protection of data in the global arena, okay? So with the advent in the past sort of decade or so of big data, social media, and internet use and globalization, ethical use of data has been redefined. But for us, for all intents and purposes, the ethics is still the same. It's a risk-benefit. The risk being for individual patients, for groups of patients, or for events, say, is there the possibility of being identified by this data set? That's the risk. And we're always contrasting that with the benefit, which is the scientific benefit of understanding these operations and also taking that information to increase safety and increase best practices and inform and decrease negative outcomes. The jurisdictions, as well on a global level, have always been a bit of an impediment. And the truth is, with globalization, the jurisdictional concerns are becoming more homogeneous and less disparate. Here's some links to things in terms of international compilations that look at the differences in terms of ethics and legality of data collection. But overall, the important point to take home is that informed consent is the issue. Do individuals need to be informed of the fact that their data will be used for these sort of research purposes when we collect it on event? Do events need to be informed? And that's in the context of a changing landscape of who owns data, and some people suggesting that de-identified data is in fact, the owners of de-identified data is the person who has the data. And that's probably in the context of the globalization and big data stuff, but that helps us as well. The truth is, for scientific research with de-identified and limited data sets and with good, secure, controlled access to that data set, it's very reasonable in the context of a low risk to the individual to be doing these sort of things. So that takes us to crowdsourced registries, which is a term that I came across, and I think it's very 2019, and I think it's the future of the way we should be doing these things. And it takes us away from the registry of registries idea, which was the World Health Organization, for example, International Registry of Clinical Trials, where there are a number of clinical trials registries that then report up to a global registry to follow the ethics chain and make sure that there's appropriate reporting where larger scale data can be processed at that high level. And moving into a more globalized idea of these databases, which is people on their smartphones can put in data and we can use that to look at things under the context of what I just described in terms of the data privacy and ethical limitations. So some examples of that are the EMDAT or EMDAT, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, called in Belgium. It's a disaster database, which I'll talk about here. And there's also another one that, these are just two great examples. I think the Airway Collective in Canada, where anesthesiologists are putting in at the patient's bedside after they've done certain airway procedures, how they did it and how it went, de-identified, and then they're iteratively looking back to say, what was best practices, what was the best outcome, and how should we be informing our care in awake intubations or front of neck access or those sort of things. So this is the EMDAT database, which is online, and as of this morning, if you see on the upper right there, disasters of the week, 158 have been reported so far in 2019. It gives an ongoing statistical update, because that's part of their mandate, is to keep a public view of how the data registry is performing so that anybody can see that data. And on the bottom left side, it's got guidelines that show there are different levels of data. So depending on what your database contains or how much level you want to share, you have the ability to do deeper level research based on how much you're able or willing to provide. So the last slide in terms of the data registry is dealing with information technology, the funding and the access for actually creating the infrastructure for this. The bottom, again, is what we've talked about already, goals and objectives, the consultative process with our stakeholders, the standardization of definitions, data sets, and the considerations of ethics and privacy as the foundation for what it is we're going to build. And up top, we have where is this website and electronic stuff going to be hosted? What is the format of the database, and how do we comply with data standards in order to potentially talk with other databases that might be doing the same thing? How do we secure it? How do we maintain it, especially for cleaning it in the context of it being crowdsourced and very variable data potentially? And then how do we plan for advertising and support? What kind of space do we use to allow for those materials, templates, toolkits, those sort of things for people to access them? From a funding perspective, the hosting is really minimal these days. The maintenance is really just a human resources issue. And the truth is, most of us do this stuff on the side of our desk, and so we can potentially do this, but the reality is if we could find money to do this, and to do the advertising and the support, the data entry support or the data template support or those toolkits, we're really, with the networks we have, we're really in a position to answer some very big questions, some big data type questions. Where does this sourcing come from? Well, it's underway, but the collaborators and the stakeholders are the main source of that. We can look at memberships for people supplying, but I think that's probably going to be limiting. And I think this needs some addressing still, but it's in progress. Finally, who has access to the database? So we could do public updates like we're on that disaster medicine database. Can users access a certain level of data on their own if they have a user that's been confirmed? And then finally, is there some sort of research board or governance? And that will probably be built into the structure of this in order to allow people to make requests and have those received and evaluated by people who have the data and privacy considerations in mind. So in conclusion, global event data registry should be a priority for moving mass gathering research to the next level. Stakeholder consultation is ongoing and you are currently being consulted. Standardized definitions and data sets are improving our ability to report and use event data. Ethical and legal jurisdictional concerns are addressed by the use of anonymized, de-identified, and securely stored data in this day and age. Infrastructure and funding are attainable to get a functional system running. Thanks everybody for your attention. I'm very excited to collaborate in the same way that Adam's expressed that we are the people to do this. Please let's have this conversation continue, and I'd be happy to take any questions.